Those footprints were wet. Fresh wet. The kind of wet that only happens when something has just walked out of the ocean. And they started at the edge of the platform, where the rail meets the 60-foot drop to the North Sea, and they walked across my clean deck toward the crew quarters door. And I was the only one outside. I had been the only one outside for 2 hours. And whatever made those footprints had walked right past me without making a sound. I am a roustabout. I work the night shift on an oil production platform in the North Sea, one of the most unforgiving industrial environments on the surface of this earth, and I have been doing this work for 9 years. If you do not know what a roustabout is, I will tell you. We are the general labor force of the oil rig. We clean, we maintain, we assist the drillers and the roughnecks and the engineers. We move equipment, we inspect, we paint, we scrub, we handle everything that keeps a platform operational that nobody else wants to do. It is hard work, physical work, unglamorous work, and when you are doing it at 3 in the morning on a platform in the middle of the North Sea, with 40-foot swells rolling beneath you and the wind coming off the water cold enough to cut through 4 layers of clothing, it is also profoundly lonely work. I need you to stay with me through this entire account, because what I found on that deck is only the beginning, and what I found out about those footprints over the following 3 days is the part of this story that I cannot make peace with. I have told 2 people this story in person, and both of them suggested explanations that I had already considered and already ruled out, and when I walked them through why those explanations do not work, they went quiet in a way that told me they could not find another one. So stay with me, because this deserves to be heard in full. Let me tell you about working nights on a North Sea platform, because the environment matters enormously to understanding what I experienced. The platform I work on is a fixed production facility, meaning it sits on legs that are anchored to the seabed, approximately 120 miles offshore. When I say North Sea, I want you to have the right picture. This is not calm, picturesque ocean. The North Sea is a body of water with a reputation and a temperament. The weather systems that move across it are severe and fast-moving. In winter, which is when this happened, the wind speeds routinely exceed 50 knots. The waves can exceed 40 feet, and the temperature of the air hovers between -2 and 4 degrees Celsius for weeks at a time. The water temperature is not significantly warmer. A person who went into the North Sea in January would have, depending on conditions, somewhere between 30 minutes and 2 hours before hypothermia became fatal. That is the environment. Cold, dark, violent, completely inhospitable to unprotected human presence. The platform itself, at night, is a specific kind of place. The crew complement on nights is smaller than days. Most of the senior engineers and management are on day rotation. Nights is when the maintenance work happens, the unglamorous stuff, the continuous operation monitoring, the cleaning and upkeep. There are maybe 40 people on the platform at any given time total, but on any given night, outside of the control room and the accommodation block, you might encounter 3 or 4 people in any given area. The exterior of the platform, the open decks, the walkways around the perimeter, the equipment bays and pipe racks. At 3 in the morning in January with the wind screaming off the water, you will frequently find nobody at all. Just the machinery and the lights and the wind and the ocean 200 feet below and in every direction. There are rules on this platform that exist in the official documentation. Fall protection rules, man overboard protocols, buddy system requirements for certain high-risk tasks. And then there are the informal ones, the ones the old hands tell you, the ones that exist because something happened that made someone decide a rule was needed, but nobody wants to put it in writing and have to explain where it came from. The rule that matters for this story is this. On the exterior decks, after midnight, you do not work alone near the perimeter rail. You can work in the interior of the deck areas. You can work near the center. But near the rail, near the edge where the platform drops to the sea, you have a partner or you do not go. The official reason given for this is man overboard risk, which is real and legitimate and a genuine concern. But the unofficial reason, the reason the old hands give when they think you are ready to hear it, is different. The man who told me was named Fergus, a Scotsman, 22 years on North Sea platforms, the kind of person who has earned the right to say anything he wants about this job because he has survived it for more than 2 decades. He told me, very simply, that the North Sea at night puts things on the deck. He said it just like that, not elaborating, not performing, just stating it as a fact he had decided to share with me because he thought I should know. I asked him what he meant, and he said, things come up from the water. At night, they get on the deck and they walk around, and they go back over the edge before anyone sees them properly. And the men who have gone missing on this platform over the years, not all of them fell. Some of them saw something at the edge that they should not have walked toward. And he said no more about it, and I did not ask because his face said that was all he intended to give me. I have thought about that conversation many times in the 9 years since he had it with me. Mostly I filed it under rig mythology, the kind of thing that develops naturally in any isolated, dangerous, all-male working environment where people live in close quarters for weeks at a stretch and need narratives to organize the fear that the job generates. I respected Fergus enormously, but I did not take the supernatural content of what he said literally. Not until the night with the footprints. It was a Wednesday in January, 2:45 in the morning, near enough. I had been on my shift since 11 p.m., and I was on exterior deck maintenance, which that night meant scrubbing the drill floor access walkway on the eastern side of the platform. This is unglamorous work. You have a deck scrubber, which is essentially a large industrial mop and brush unit, and you work your way systematically across the deck surface, removing the grime and oil residue and salt accumulation that builds up continuously on any surface exposed to North Sea air. It is physical, repetitive, mind-numbing work, and at 2:45 in the morning in January, with the wind coming across the water and the spray hitting you and the whole platform groaning and creaking in the swell, it is also deeply isolating work. I had started at the crew quarters access door on the eastern deck and was working my way outward toward the perimeter with the intention of cleaning right up to the rail and then working back in. I had been at it for about 40 minutes. The deck behind me, from the door to about halfway to the rail, was clean, scrubbed, wet with rinse water, but uniformly wet, the way a scrubbed deck looks. No marks, no residue. I knew it was clean because I had just done it, and I had a light clipped to my hard hat, and I had been looking at the deck as I worked. I was maybe 6 feet from the perimeter rail when I stopped to adjust my equipment, and I looked back at the section of deck I had just cleaned, and there were footprints in it. Wet footprints. Fresh, barefoot, human-sized footprints. Deeply wet. The kind of wet that fills in immediately and clearly because the foot that made them was not just damp but soaking. The kind of wet you would be if you had just come out of water. There were maybe 8 or 9 of them, coming from the direction of the perimeter rail, walking across my clean, scrubbed, uniformly wet deck, heading toward the crew quarters door. And they stopped about 2 feet from where I was standing. I stood very still for a moment. Then I turned and looked at the rail. There was nothing at the rail. There was nothing between me and the rail, 6 feet of empty deck, lit by the platform's working lights and my hard hat lamp. There was nothing on the other side of the rail but the North Sea, 40 feet below, black and rolling in the January dark. There was nobody on the deck with me. I was alone. I turned back and looked at the footprints. They were still there. I crouched down and looked at them carefully. They were not my footprints. I was wearing steel-toed work boots, and the prints my boots made were the specific pattern of my boot sole, clearly distinguishable. These were smooth, barefoot, the ball and heel and 5-toe impressions of a bare human foot, pressed into my clean wet deck. The size was roughly consistent with an average adult male foot, and they were coming from the rail. I walked the line of them backward, from where they stopped near me, back across the deck toward the rail, and I crouched at the rail and looked down. The North Sea was below me. The platform lighting lit the water surface enough to see it churning in the swell. There was nothing in the water. No boat, no figure, no debris. Nothing. I stood up and looked at the footprints for a long time. Then I did what any rational person would do. I went through the rational explanations. Someone from the crew had been on the deck, barefoot, before I started scrubbing, and I had washed over their footprints without noticing but missed this section. Possible in theory, but I had cleaned this entire section systematically, and there were no prints before I reached this area. And also, nobody goes barefoot on an exterior deck in January in the North Sea. The deck surface is non-skid steel grating, and it is cold enough to cause injury, and it is a safety violation. Nobody was barefoot on this deck. Another explanation, sea spray. The wave action below the platform occasionally sends spray up to deck level. Could spray have created a pattern that resembled footprints? I looked at the prints again. They were not a spray pattern. They were clear, defined, sequential footprints. Ball arch, heel toes. Left foot, right foot, alternating in the correct stride pattern. Sea spray does not make sequential barefoot impressions with anatomically correct toe spacing. I could not find an explanation that worked. So I did the thing that the unofficial rules say you do not do, which is to say I stood at the perimeter rail for an extended period of time looking at the water. I stood there for maybe 5 minutes, which is a long time to stand at a rail in January in the North Sea at 3 in the morning, and I looked at the water below, and I looked at the surface, and I looked at the space between the platform's legs where the swell moved and churned, and I saw nothing. Nothing unusual, just the ocean. I went back to work. I re-scrubbed this section. I documented the footprints in my personal log, but not in the official maintenance log because I did not know how to explain them. I finished my shift and I slept, and I came back the next night and nothing unusual happened, and I started to think maybe I had simply been more tired than I realized and my perception had been compromised. And then on the second night, I found them again. Same location, same rail-to-deck trajectory, but this time there were more of them. Not just one set. 3 sets of prints, 3 separate individuals by the sizing and gait, all coming from the rail, all crossing the deck, all heading toward the crew quarters door. And this time, one of the sets did not stop in the middle of the deck. One of the sets went all the way to the crew quarters door. And on the door handle, which is stainless steel, there was moisture. The specific, dripping, soaking moisture of a hand that has been in the water. I went inside. I walked the crew quarters corridor. Every door was closed. Every room was occupied by someone legitimately assigned to it. Nobody unaccounted for. Nobody wet. Nobody barefoot. The door handle was the only anomaly, and by the time I got the maintenance supervisor to come look at it, it had dried. On the third night, I did not go outside alone. I told my working partner that night, a young lad from Newcastle on his second rotation, that I wanted a second person on the eastern deck for the scrubbing task. He did not ask why. He came with me. And that night, the eastern deck was clean all shift. No footprints. Not one. As if whatever had been using that section of platform to come and go from the water knew that there were 2 of us, and decided not to. I have thought about Fergus's words many times since those 3 nights. Things come up from the water. At night, they get on the deck. They walk around. And the men who have gone missing, not all of them fell. There have been missing men on this platform. Over the years. Not many, but some. The official classifications vary. Man overboard, circumstances unknown. Lost at sea during adverse weather event. Unwitnessed fall. The North Sea is a genuinely dangerous environment, and genuine accidents happen on offshore platforms, and some of those missing men were accidents. But I have looked at the names. I have looked at the dates, and several of them were working night shift. Exterior deck, the eastern side of the platform. In winter, I work nights. I will keep working nights because it is the rotation I am assigned, and I am not going to give this job up over footprints I cannot explain. But I do not work alone on exterior decks anymore. Not at any hour. And I do not stand at the perimeter rail and look at the water below me. And when I am scrubbing the eastern deck and I reach the last 6 feet before the rail, I stop there and I work back inward, and I leave those 6 feet unscrubbed, because that is the space between where whatever comes up from the water arrives and where I am standing, and I would like to keep that space between us for as long as I am on this platform. The North Sea does not care about us. It was here before the rigs, and it will be here after the rigs, and the things that live in it have been living in it since long before any human being decided to put a steel structure on legs above it and call it a workplace. We are visitors here. We are temporary, and some of what lives below knows we are up here and comes up occasionally to remind us of that. To walk across our decks with wet bare feet. To try our doors. To look at us from the edge before it goes back over the rail and back down into the water where it lives. I stay away from the rail. I work with a partner. And every morning when the shift ends and the sun comes up and the North Sea goes from black to gray to green in the winter dawn, I am genuinely, deeply grateful that it is daytime and that whatever found its way onto the deck last night has gone back to where it came from. Until tonight, when the sun goes down and the lights come on and the deck is dark and empty again and the water below is doing what North Sea water does in the dark, which is move and wait and occasionally send something up. Story number 2. My camera was running the seabed survey feed at 4 in the morning when a hand came out of a cave at the bottom of the ocean and pulled the camera into the dark. A pale hand, long fingers, moving with a purpose that nothing at that depth, in that pressure, in that cold, should be capable of. And before the feed cut out, the camera rotated back toward the surface, toward the light, toward the ship far above. And something looked into the lens. And the face I saw in that footage, which I have watched 37 times now, is not the face of anything I can name. I am a deep-sea mining survey manager. I work overnight operations, overseeing the remote monitoring and documentation of seabed survey work in an active mineral exploration zone in the Pacific, approximately 200 miles offshore. I have been in marine geology and deep-sea operations management for 16 years. I have a postgraduate degree. The night it happened, I was monitoring a camera sled that had been deployed to survey a specific section of the seabed in our current exploration zone. The sled is essentially a steel frame carrying cameras, lights, and sensors, towed slowly across the seabed at the end of a long cable from the ship. It documents the geology, the sediment composition, the presence of mineral nodules, the biology of the area. The footage runs continuously and is recorded, and on night operations I watch the live feed and flag anything of geological or biological interest for the science team to review in the morning. At approximately 3:50 in the morning, the sled was passing through an area of particularly rough seabed topography. Ridges, outcroppings, cave entrances. Not unusual geology. This part of the ocean floor has a complex volcanic origin, and the terrain reflects that. The camera was capturing a series of cave openings in a basalt ridge, standard features, dark apertures in the dark rock, maybe 1 to 3 meters across. Nothing remarkable. I had seen hundreds like them on previous surveys. The camera was moving slowly past one particular cave entrance, maybe 2 meters wide, when I noticed the interior of the cave was reflecting our sled lights in a way that seemed slightly off. A slightly different quality to the reflection from the darkness inside, something that did not quite match the flat, non-reflective dark of an empty submarine cave. I sat forward and looked more carefully at the feed, and as I did, as the camera sled continued its slow pass across the cave entrance, the reflection resolved into something that I spent the next 30 seconds trying to rationally explain and failed to. 2 points of light inside the cave. circular, roughly the same distance apart as human eyes, at a height from the cave floor consistent with a human-proportioned face, reflecting our sled lights with a pale, cold, slightly greenish quality, the way that certain deep-sea creatures reflect light with their tapetum, the reflective layer behind the eye that you see in cats and sharks and some deep-sea fish. 2 eyes in the dark of a cave at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean at a depth of 3,200 meters, looking at my camera. I did not move. I sat at my monitoring station and I did not move. The sled continued its slow pass and the cave entrance moved to the left of frame and out of the shot. I rewound the footage. I played it again. I watched the 2 reflective points appear and I watched them track the camera as it moved, the way eyes track a moving object, and I watched them disappear as the cave left frame. I reached for my radio to call the deck officer, and then I stopped, because I did not know what to say. I had seen reflective points in a cave at depth that might be a biological entity of some kind. Nothing in the regulations required me to report that immediately. It was a biological observation for the science log, and I wanted to see more before I started waking people up. I wanted the camera to complete its transect and come back around, and I wanted to look at that cave again. The sled completed its pass of the ridge and began its return transect, and I tracked it on the navigation system and watched the seabed terrain on the feed as it moved back toward the cave area. And when the cave came back into frame, the lights from the sled illuminating the entrance, there was nothing inside it. The 2 reflective points were gone. The cave was dark and empty, and the interior reflected nothing. But there was something outside it. In the open water just beyond the cave entrance, in the area between the cave and the camera, something was hovering. Not resting on the seabed. Hovering. In open water. At 3,200 meters below the surface, in water cold enough to make human survival impossible in seconds. Something was hanging in the mid-water in front of the cave, and as the camera moved closer, as the sled lights fell fully on it, I saw what it was. A figure, human in proportion, pale, very pale, the pale that something becomes when it has not seen light in an extremely long time. Facing the camera, long arms, very long, slightly too long in proportion to what they were attached to. And the face, which the camera lights were now fully illuminating, was a face. Human features, organized into the configuration of a face. Eyes, nose, a mouth. Looking at the camera. And then it moved. It moved toward the camera. Not quickly, deliberately. Gliding through the water without the motion of swimming. Without the kick or the stroke of anything propelling itself through fluid. Simply moving forward through the water the way you move through air when walking. And as it moved toward the camera, its right arm extended. The hand at the end of that arm, the pale, long-fingered hand, reached forward and upward toward the camera lens. And it grabbed the camera. The feed lurched. The image spun. The tension sensor on the cable read a sudden load change as something physically pulled the camera sled toward the cave entrance. I had about 4 seconds of spinning, lurching footage before the sled's emergency release triggered and the cable separated from the camera array and the camera began its ballistic ascent toward the surface, tumbling upward through the water, and before it gained enough distance that the figure was no longer in frame, the camera, spinning as it rose, happened to point back downward toward the figure below. And the figure was looking up, directly up, following the camera with its eyes as it rose. And it was not alone. Behind it, behind the figure that had grabbed my camera, filling the cave entrance and the open water around the cave, were others, many others, the same pale, long, wrong proportions, all looking up, all watching my camera rise away from them toward the surface. The camera was recovered 2 hours later. The footage was intact on its internal recording system. I have watched it 37 times. I have watched the hand reach out. I have watched the face. I have watched the others filling the cave entrance. And every time, What I see is the same thing, and what I see is not something with a biological classification that I can look up in any deep sea species database I have access to. Here is what I found in the metadata, because this is the part one have not told anyone. When I reviewed the camera's internal data log, I found that the camera had a function I had not previously utilized, a passive acoustic recording capability, capturing sounds in the ambient environment at the seafloor. The camera records sound whenever it is deployed. It has always done this. I had never reviewed the acoustic data from any previous deployment because I was not a biologist and it was not my area of focus. The acoustic data from this deployment, from the entire 12-hour deployment before the camera was grabbed, contains something in the frequency range associated with biological vocalization, something that my acoustic analysis software flagged as patterned, non-random, structured sound, not the random ambient noise of deep sea geology or current movement. Structured, repetitive, organized. My software is not designed for linguistic analysis. It is designed for geological and biological acoustic classification. But I took the audio file and I ran it through a spectrogram and I looked at the pattern. And the pattern was consistent. Repeating elements. Structural regularity. The characteristics that, in any acoustic signal from a surface environment, would lead a linguist to classify the signal as language. Something at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean, in the dark, at 3,200 meters of depth, in the hours before it grabbed my camera, was talking, was producing structured, patterned, organized sound that my software could not classify as any known biological vocalization, and that had the acoustic characteristics of language. And it had been doing this for hours before the camera came near it, before it knew we were watching. I have not published this. I have not formally reported it. The camera loss was documented as equipment failure due to seabed contact, which is not entirely false because the seabed was in contact with it, just not in the way the report implies. I kept the footage on a personal drive. I kept the acoustic data, and I continue to do my job, to monitor the seabed, to review the camera feeds, to document what our survey equipment finds in the deep. But I no longer watch the feeds alone at night. I have made sure that every night operation has 2 people in the monitoring room at all times. And I do not linger on cave entrances when the camera passes them. I do not stop the sled to get a better look at anything that might be inside one. And when the acoustic monitoring flags patterned sound from below, I log it, and I move on, and I do not sit with it in the dark and listen to it. Because whatever is down there was talking before we arrived, and it is still talking now. And after watching that footage 37 times, after seeing the way it looked into my camera lens before the feed went dark, after watching the others fill the cave entrance and look upward as my camera rose away from them, I have come to a conclusion that I cannot share professionally, but that I believe completely. They know we are up here. They know we are on the surface. They know we lower things into their world on cables and watch through them. They have known for longer than I can calculate. And they are patient in a way that nothing with a language should be patient. And someday, something that we lower into the deep is not going to come back up. And we will not know why. And I will know. And I will have to live with knowing. Story number 3. Something called my name from inside an empty storage tank at 2 in the morning. Not shouted. Not screamed. Said it. Quietly. Clearly. The way a person says your name when they are standing right next to you. And I was standing 40 feet away on the top of that tank. And when I looked over the edge and put my light down into it, the tank was empty. And the voice said my name again. From directly below me. From inside an empty steel vessel that nothing alive could have gotten into. I haul crude oil. I have been driving tanker trucks for 12 years. And for the last 4 of those years, I have been running the night shift loading routes out of a crude storage terminal in 3 Rivers, Texas. 3 Rivers is a small town, South Texas, oil country, The kind of place where the land is flat in every direction and the sky at night is enormous and the nearest city is an hour away, and at 2 in the morning the terminal and the surrounding roads are empty in the specific, absolute way that only very rural places in very flat country can be empty. No ambient light beyond the terminal itself. No sound beyond the machinery and the wind across the flat land. Just you and the tanks and the pipes and the darkness. I need you to hear this whole story, not just the part where the voice called my name. What happened after I heard it, what happened over the following week, and what I found out about the history of that specific tank when I looked it up. That is the part that changed everything. That is the part that took what might have been a strange experience and turned it into something I think about every single night when I pull into that terminal and kill my headlights and start the loading procedure. Stay with me through all of it. Every part matters. Let me tell you about crude oil hauling because it is not the kind of job most people know anything about. I drive a tanker truck, a semi with a large cylindrical tank trailer behind it, and I transport crude oil from storage terminals to refineries and from wellheads to storage. The loading process, which is where the voice happened, involves connecting my truck's fill lines to the terminal's loading system and filling my tank with crude from the storage tanks. Depending on the terminal, this loading process is largely automated. I monitor it. I check connections. I verify pressures and flow rates. I walk the equipment. And at a small terminal like Three Rivers, which runs minimal staff on nights, I am frequently the only human being physically present at the loading rack during the loading process. The Three Rivers terminal has 8 large above-ground storage tanks. These are the tall cylindrical tanks you see in oil country, white or gray, maybe 30 feet tall and 50 feet in diameter, holding hundreds of thousands of gallons of crude. They sit in containment berms, surrounded by earthen walls to contain spills, arranged in a row along the east side of the terminal property. The loading rack, where I fill my truck, is on the west side of the property, connected to the tanks by underground pipes. The tanks themselves, the physical vessels, have access hatches on top. These are large round openings, maybe 3 feet in diameter, with locking covers, used for inspection and maintenance. When a tank is in service, meaning it contains product, the hatch is closed and locked. When a tank is out of service for inspection or cleaning, the hatch may be open and the tank is empty. On the night the voice called my name, tank number 7 was out of service. I knew this because I checked the service board when I arrived, the way I always do, and tank 7 was marked out of service, undergoing inspection, which meant it was empty of product, vented, open-hatched. The loading process that night was running normally. My truck was connected to the rack and filling. I had maybe 20 minutes left in the loading cycle. I did this walk during that time because there is nothing else to do, and I like to be moving rather than just standing waiting. So I was walking the terminal, not for any specific work reason, just moving, and my route took me past the tank farm on the east side. I stopped at tank 7, the one out of service. I stopped because it looked different from the others. The others are all in service, sealed, under a slight positive pressure from the vapor above the crude. They have a specific look. A kind of sealed, contained quality. Tank 7 looked different. It had its hatch open on top, which I knew from the service board, and the tank looked empty in the way that only truly empty things look. A particular absence of weight or content that you can somehow sense even from the outside of a steel vessel. I climbed the external ladder on the side of the tank. This is a standard ladder that goes from the berm level up to the top of the tank, a catwalk around the circumference of the top, standard access structure. I climbed it because I wanted to look in, not for any operational reason. Just because it was there and it was open and I was bored and waiting for my truck to fill. This, I know in retrospect, was not my best decision. Not because of any safety reason, though there are safety reasons to stay off uninspected tanks, but for the reason that I could not have anticipated at that point. I got to the top of the tank, which was maybe 30 feet off the ground, and I walked to the open hatch and I looked in. The tank was empty. The interior of a crude storage tank at 2 in the morning with an open hatch and my flashlight pointed into it. Just the curved steel walls going down, the residual coating of crude on the interior walls that gives them a specific dark sheen. The floor of the tank 30 feet below me, a drain fitting in the center, nothing else. Empty. I stood there for maybe 30 seconds looking into the empty tank, the way you look at large, empty spaces, and then I turned to go back down the ladder. And the voice said my name. My name. My actual name, the name my mother gave me, the name on my license and my logs and my company ID. Said clearly, said quietly, from directly below me, from inside the tank. I turned back to the hatch. I pointed my flashlight down into the tank again. Empty. The curved steel walls. The coating of old crude. The drain fitting. 30 feet of empty air between me and the floor. Nothing in it. Nothing anywhere in it. Completely empty. And the voice said my name again. Same volume. Same tone. Directly below me. From inside the tank that was empty. I want to describe the voice to you accurately because the description matters. It was not a distorted voice. It was not a distant voice or an echoed voice or a voice that had the quality of wind or machinery creating something that approximated speech. It was a voice the way a person standing next to you is a voice. Clear, close, directed. It said my name with the specific, unremarkable casualness of a person who knows your name and is using it to get your attention. Not dramatic, not threatening, just your name. As if to say, hey, come here, listen, your name. I came down that ladder faster than I have ever climbed down anything in my life, and I walked across the berm and I stood outside the containment wall for a full 5 minutes before I could think clearly enough to do anything. And what I did was check my truck, verify the loading was proceeding, confirm via the terminal's intercom that no other personnel were on site tonight, which the night desk confirmed, and go back to waiting for my truck to fill. I did not go back to the tank. I did not tell anyone that night what I had heard. I finished loading, I drove my run, I came back, I went home. Over the next 3 days I looked up the history of Tank 7. This is not difficult to do if you know where to look. Terminal maintenance records, incident logs, the kinds of documents that accumulate around any industrial facility over decades of operation. The Three Rivers Terminal has been operating since the 1970s, and it has records going back to its opening. Tank 7 had an incident in 1987. A maintenance worker entered the tank for internal inspection without confirming that the tank had been properly decontaminated and vented. The atmosphere inside was not safe. He lost consciousness inside the tank and was not found for several hours. He died. His name was in the record. A man, about my age when he died, doing the same kind of work in the same kind of place. He had been working nights. He had been alone on the terminal when the incident occurred. His first name was the same as mine. I want you to sit with that for a moment. His first name was the same as mine. A man who died alone inside Tank 7, at night, when no one else was present at the terminal, had the same first name as me. I told you at the beginning that I have been running the night loading route at this terminal for 4 years. I have loaded from this terminal maybe 800 times. I have walked the terminal on almost every one of those loads while I waited for my truck to fill. I have walked past Tank 7 probably 800 times. This was the first time I had ever climbed to the top and looked in. And it was the first time anything had spoken from inside it. I do not know if whatever is in that tank only speaks when someone climbs to the top and looks in. I do not know if it has been saying that name, his name, my name, on all the nights when nobody climbed up and nobody listened. I do not know how a name that has been dead since 1987 persists inside a steel tank that has been cleaned and inspected and put back in service dozens of times since then. I do not have an explanation that satisfies me. What I know is that I have not climbed that ladder again. What I know is that when Tank 7 is marked out of service, I stay on the west side of the terminal and I do not walk the tank farm. What I know is that the name it called is mine and was his, and whatever distinction exists between those two names and whatever is inside that tank, I am not interested in finding out if it makes one. The terminal is quiet at 2 in the morning. The land is flat in every direction. The sky is enormous. And Tank 7 sits in its berm with its steel walls and its old crude coating on the inside, and whatever it holds that the maintenance records do not document. And sometimes, when I am connected to the loading rack and waiting for my truck to fill, and the terminal is quiet and the wind is coming across the flat land from the east, where the tank farm is, I think I can almost hear it. Very faint, very clear, saying a name. I turn the radio on when that happens. I turn it up loud, and I watch the loading monitor, and I wait for the cycle to complete, and I do not walk the terminal, and I do not go east, and I do not listen. Because it knows my name. It has always known my name. And whatever is waiting in Tank 7 for someone to climb to the top and look in, whatever it was that spoke to me that night in the same voice, with the same quietness, with the same casual familiarity as a man who wants your attention, has been waiting in there since 1987. And it is patient. It has already demonstrated that. 37 years of patience, waiting for someone with the right name to climb that ladder and lean over the edge. And if you work nights at a crude terminal, if you haul crude on the night routes, if you find yourself at 2 in the morning at a terminal where one of the tanks is marked out of service, where there is an open hatch at the top of a tank that is supposed to be empty, I am asking you to do something very simple. Do not climb the ladder. Do not walk to the hatch. Do not look in. Whatever is in there knows your name too. It has been in there long enough to know all the names. And it is very, very good at waiting for the right one to come close enough to hear it.